The busiest people are often the emptiest people. And if you're proud of how little time you have for yourself, you're proud of the wrong thing. Society has convinced you that being constantly busy is a badge of honor, that having no time for reflection means you're important and needed. But busy people are usually just avoiding people, and that person is themselves. They fill every moment with activity, meetings, and obligations because sitting still means facing the fact that they don't know who they are or what they really want. The cult of busyness is just another form of running away. And everyone who brags about working 16-hour days is usually running from the 16 minutes it would take to realize they're building someone else's dream instead of their own. 𝐁𝐄𝐒𝐓 can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. You know what I find fascinating about successful people? The thing that sets them apart isn't what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when nobody's around. It's what happens in those quiet moments when the world isn't demanding their attention, when there's no applause to earn, no approval to seek. Here's something that might surprise you. The strongest people you know, the most accomplished individuals you admire, the ones who seem to have this inner strength that nothing can shake, they all share one critical habit. They understand the incredible power of silence, not the kind of silence that comes from having nothing to say, but the kind that comes from having so much depth, so much clarity, so much going on inside that words would only diminish it. Think about this for a moment. In our world today, silence has become almost extinct. We're surrounded by constant noise, endless chatter, perpetual stimulation. People reach for their phones the moment they feel even a hint of quiet. They turn on music, call friends, scroll through social media, watch videos, anything to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But what if I told you that this very thing most people are running from, this silence they're so afraid of, is actually the secret to becoming everything you're capable of becoming? What if the quiet moments you've been avoiding are exactly where your transformation is waiting to happen? You see, we live in a world that's terrified of quiet. The moment there's a pause in conversation, someone feels compelled to fill it. The second we're alone in our cars, we reach for the radio. When we sit down to eat, we turn on the television. We've become addicted to external stimulation because we've forgotten how to be comfortable with ourselves. But here's what I've learned after decades of studying what makes people truly successful, truly fulfilled, truly powerful in the deepest sense of the words. The best version of you, the person you're meant to become, that person is built in the quiet moments when nobody else is around. Most people run from silence like it's going to hurt them. They fill every empty moment with noise, with activity, with other people's voices. Why? Because silence forces you to face yourself. And for most people, that's the scariest thing they can think of. When you're alone with your thoughts, you can't pretend anymore. You can't blame anyone else. You can't hide behind excuses or other people's opinions. It's just you and the truth. But here's the beautiful thing about that truth. Once you stop running from it, once you learn to sit with it, it becomes your greatest teacher. See, there's a big difference between being lonely and being alone. Loneliness is when you need other people to feel complete. Being alone is when you're comfortable with yourself. And that comfort, that peace you find in your own company, that's where real strength begins. Think about a tree for a moment. What makes a tree strong? Is it the branches you can see, the leaves that everybody admires? No, it's the roots you can't see, growing deep in the darkness, in the silence of the soil. Those roots don't grow because anyone's watching. They don't grow for applause. They grow because that's what trees do when nobody's looking. And the deeper those roots go, the stronger that tree becomes. You're that tree. And the best version of you, the strongest version of you, is being built right now in the silence, in the moments when you think nothing important is happening. Every time you choose to sit quietly and think instead of reaching for your phone, you're growing roots. Every time you choose to reflect on your day instead of just collapsing in front of the TV, you're growing. But what exactly happens in those silent moments? What's so important about being alone with yourself? Let me tell you what I've learned. When you give yourself the gift of silence, really give yourself that gift, magic starts to happen. Real magic. Not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that changes your life from the inside out. First thing that happens is you start to see yourself clearly. Not the way other people see you, not the way you want to be seen, but the way you actually are. And yes, that can be uncomfortable at first. You might see some things you don't like. You might realize you've been fooling yourself about some things, but you know what? That's good. That's the beginning of real change. You can't fix what you can't see. You can't improve what you won't acknowledge. So when silence shows you the truth about yourself, even when it's not pretty, that's not pretty. That's not punishment. That's your chance to become better. In the silence, you also start to hear your own voice. Not the voice that repeats what everyone else is saying, not the voice that tries to fit in or please other people, but your authentic voice. The voice that knows what you really want, what you really value, what you're really capable of. Most people never hear this voice because there's too much noise in their lives. But when you create space for silence, that voice gets stronger and clearer. This is where your real goals come from, not the goals that sound good to other people, not the goals that look impressive on social media, but the goals that actually matter to you. The goals that get you excited to wake up in the morning. The goals that make you willing to do hard things because you know they're leading somewhere important. You know what else gets built in the silence? Character. Real character. Not the kind you put on for other people, but the kind that exists when nobody's looking. Character is what you do when there's no external reward, when there's no one to impress, when it's just you and your principles. Every time you keep a promise to yourself in private, you're building character. Every time you do something difficult because you know it's right, even when no one will ever know, you're building character. Every time you choose the harder path because it leads to who you want to become, you're building character. And here's the thing about character built in silence. It's solid, it's reliable. It doesn't crumble under pressure because it wasn't built for show. It was built for real life, for the long haul, for the moments when everything else falls away and all you have left is who you really are. This is what I mean when I say the best version of you is built in silence. It's not just about being quiet. It's about using that quiet time to do the internal work that creates external results. It's about developing the mental discipline that makes everything else possible. See, most people think discipline is about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. But real discipline, the kind that lasts, the kind that changes your life, that discipline starts in your mind. It starts with your thoughts. And you can only gain control of your thoughts when you spend time with them, when you observe them, when you learn to direct them instead of just letting them run wild. This happens in silence. This is the foundation of everything else. Because if you can't control your thoughts, you can't control your actions. And if you can't control your actions, you can't control your results. But when you develop that mental discipline, when you learn to direct your thoughts toward what you want instead of what you fear, everything changes. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Jim, this sounds good, but I don't have time for all this silence and reflection. I've got bills to pay, responsibilities to handle, people depending on me. I can't just sit around thinking all day. And you're right. You can't sit around thinking all day. But you can give yourself 10 minutes. You can give yourself 20 minutes. You can wake up 15 minutes earlier or go to bed 15 minutes later. You can turn off the radio in your car and think instead of listening to the same songs over and over. Think about the most important decisions you've ever made. The ones that really change your life for the better. Where did those decisions come from? Were they made in the middle of a crowd with people shouting advice at you? Or were they made in quiet moments when you had time to think, to feel, to connect with what was really important to you? I'm willing to bet they came from quiet moments, because that's where real decisions come from. Not from pressure or panic or trying to please other people, but from a deep understanding of who you are and what you want your life to stand for. When you first start spending time alone with your thoughts, you might be shocked by what you find there. You might find worry you've been ignoring, anger you've been suppressing, dreams you've been afraid to admit. Your first instinct might be to turn on the TV, call a friend, do anything to make those uncomfortable feelings go away. But those uncomfortable feelings aren't your enemies. They're messengers trying to tell you something important about your life, about what needs to change, about what you've been avoiding. When you feel worry in the silence, that worry is pointing you towards something that needs your attention. When you feel anger, that anger is pointing you towards something that's not aligned with your values. When you feel those buried dreams, that's not torture, that's opportunity. Those dreams are still alive because they're still possible. All this happens in the silence. This is the internal work that nobody sees, but everybody benefits from. Because when you do this work, when you face these things, when you process these emotions and thoughts and dreams and fears, you become a different person. You become clearer, stronger, more focused, more authentic. And that person, the person who emerges from this internal work, that person is capable of things the old you never dreamed of. Not because they have more talent or more luck or more opportunities, but because they know who they are. They know what they want. They know what they're willing to do to get it, and they know what they're not willing to do, which is just as important. This kind of clarity is powerful. When you know who you are, you stop wasting time trying to be someone else. When you know what you want, you stop chasing things that don't matter. When you know what you're capable of, you stop settling for less than you deserve. But this clarity doesn't come from reading books or attending seminars or listening to motivational speeches, though those things can be helpful. This clarity comes from spending time with yourself, from asking yourself hard questions and being willing to hear the answers, from sitting with your thoughts and feelings until they start to make sense. I want to share something with you that might surprise you. Some of the most successful people I know tell me their most productive time isn't when they're in meetings or making deals. Their most productive time is when they're alone, thinking, planning, reflecting on what's working and what isn't, connecting with their vision for the future. They understand that the quality of your external life is determined by the quality of your internal life. The strength of your public performance is determined by the depth of your private preparation. And those roots grow in silence. They grow in the quiet moments when you're not performing for anyone, when you're not trying to impress anyone, when you're just being honest with yourself about where you are and where you want to go. This is where real goals are born. Not the goals that sound good when you say them out loud, but the goals that resonate in your soul, the goals that align with your values, your interests, your natural abilities, your deepest desires for what your life could become. When you create space for silence in your life, you give these authentic goals room to emerge. You start to distinguish between what you want and what other people want for you. You start to see the difference between goals that inspire you and goals that just sound impressive. And here's something beautiful about authentic goals. They come with their own motivation. You don't have to force yourself to work toward them. You don't have to rely on willpower to keep going when things get difficult. These goals pull you forward because they're connected to who you really are and what you really care about. This is the foundation of lasting success. Not success that depends on external circumstances staying perfect, but success that comes from internal alignment, from knowing that what you're doing matters to you, that it's taking you toward a life you actually want to live. But let me be clear about something. Building the best version of yourself in silence doesn't mean becoming antisocial. It doesn't mean avoiding other people or thinking you're better than everyone else. It simply means that you take responsibility for creating the space you need to grow, to think, to develop your own perspective before you let other people's opinions drown it out. Some of the most generous, loving, contributive people I know are also people who value their solitude. They understand that you can't give what you don't have. You can't love others well if you don't understand and accept yourself. You can't contribute meaningfully to other people's lives if your own life is chaotic and unclear. So they invest in themselves first, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. They know that the better they become, the more they have to offer. They know that their growth benefits not just them, but everyone whose life they touch. This is what happens when you build the best version of yourself in silence. You don't become isolated or self-centered. You become more capable of real connection, real contribution, real love, because you're operating from a place of strength rather than neediness, from clarity rather than confusion, from authenticity rather than pretense. Now, let me talk about something practical. How do you actually do this? How do you create space for silence in a world that seems designed to prevent it? How do you build this practice of solitude when everyone around you thinks you should always be available, always connected, always ready to respond to whatever demands they put on you? First, you have to decide that it matters. You have to recognize that this isn't luxury or self-indulgence. This is necessity. This is the foundation of everything else you want to accomplish. Start small. Don't try to become a meditation master overnight. Just commit to 10 minutes a day of intentional silence. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just you and your thoughts. Maybe it's first thing in the morning before anyone else is awake. Maybe it's during your lunch break. In those 10 minutes, don't try to force anything. Don't pressure yourself to have profound insights or make life-changing decisions. Just be present with whatever comes up. If you feel stressed about work, acknowledge that stress. If you feel excited about a new opportunity, acknowledge that excitement. If your mind wanders to your grocery list, acknowledge that too and gently bring your attention back to the present moment. The goal isn't to stop thinking. The goal is to become aware of your thinking, to observe your mental patterns, to notice what your mind does when it's not being directed by external demands. As you develop this practice, you'll start to notice things. You'll notice which thoughts serve you and which ones don't. You'll notice which emotions are trying to tell you something important and which ones are just old habits. You'll notice the difference between your authentic voice and the voices of everyone else you've internalized over the years. And gradually, you'll start to make different choices. Not because you're forcing yourself to change, but because you're becoming clearer about what you actually want, what actually matters to you, what actually works in your life. You might notice that you've been saying yes to things that don't align with your goals. So you start saying no more often. Not rudely, not defensively, but clearly and kindly, because you know what deserves your time and energy and what doesn't. You might notice that you've been avoiding something important because you're afraid of failure or judgment. So you start taking small steps toward that thing, not because you're suddenly fearless, but because you're more afraid of regret than you are of temporary discomfort. You might notice that you've been neglecting something that brings you joy because you thought it wasn't practical or productive. So you start making space for it again because you realize that joy isn't selfish. Joy is fuel. Joy gives you the energy to handle everything else. This is how change happens. Not through dramatic revelations or sudden transformations, but through small, consistent choices made from increasing clarity about who you are and what kind of life you want to create. And here's what's amazing about this process. As you become clearer about yourself, you also become clearer about other people. You start to see them more accurately because you're not projecting your own confusion onto them. You start to respond to them more appropriately because you're not reacting from your own unprocessed emotions. Your relationships improve, not because you're trying harder to please people, but because you're showing up more authentically. You're more present because you're not constantly distracted by internal chaos. You're more patient because you're not carrying around unacknowledged stress. You're more generous because you're operating from abundance rather than scarcity. Your work improves, not because you're working more hours, but because you're working with greater focus and intention. You know what's important and what's just busy work. You know when to push harder and when to step back. You know how to solve problems more effectively because you've developed the mental discipline to think clearly under pressure. Your decision-making improves, not because you have more information, but because you know how to access your own wisdom. You can distinguish between decisions based on fear and decisions based on opportunity. You can tell the difference between what sounds good and what feels right. All this comes from that simple practice of spending time in silence with yourself, from creating space for your own thoughts and feelings to be heard, acknowledged, processed, and integrated into your conscious understanding of who you are and what you want. But I want to warn you about something. As you develop this practice, as you become clearer and stronger and more authentic, not everyone in your life is going to understand or appreciate the change. Some people are comfortable with the old version of you. They might resist the new version, even if the new version is better. Some people are invested in your confusion because it makes them feel better about their own confusion. Some people are comfortable with your weakness because it makes them feel stronger. Some people benefit from your lack of boundaries because it makes their lives easier. When you start becoming the best version of yourself, when you start operating from clarity and strength and authenticity, these people might push back. They might criticize your new priorities. They might question your new boundaries. They might try to guilt you back into old patterns that serve them but not you. This is normal. This is part of the process. And this is why you need that foundation of silence, that practice of solitude, that connection with your authentic self. Because when other people pressure you to stay small, to stay confused, to stay available for their convenience, you need to know who you are and what you stand for. You need to remember that your growth benefits everyone in the long run, even if it's uncomfortable for them in the short run. You need to trust that becoming your best self is not selfish but necessary. You need to understand that you can't help other people grow if you're not willing to grow yourself. So you stay committed to the silence. You protect that space for internal development. You remember that the best version of you is worth the temporary discomfort of other people's adjustments to your growth. And something beautiful happens as you persist in this commitment. You start to attract different people into your life. People who appreciate authenticity, who value growth, who understand that healthy relationships require two people who are committed to becoming their best selves. You also start to influence the people who are already in your life in positive ways. Not by preaching to them or trying to change them, but by example, by showing them what's possible when someone commits to their own development, by demonstrating the peace and clarity and strength that come from knowing who you are. Some of them will become curious about how you've changed. Some of them will ask what you're doing differently. Some of them will start creating their own practices of silence and solitude, and some of them won't. And that's okay too. Everyone has their own journey, their own timing, their own way of learning and growing. Your job is not to change other people. Your job is to become the best version of yourself, to do the internal work that creates external results, to build in silence the person you want to be in public. Because here's what I've learned after all these years of studying success, of working with people who've achieved extraordinary things, of examining what makes the difference between those who thrive and those who merely survive. The difference isn't talent, though talent helps. The difference isn't luck, though luck plays a role. The difference isn't even hard work, though hard work is essential. The difference is self-knowledge. The difference is clarity about who you are, what you want, and what you're willing to do to get it. The difference is the internal strength that comes from facing yourself honestly, accepting yourself completely, and committing to your own growth wholeheartedly. And that self-knowledge, that clarity, that internal strength, it's all built in silence. In the quiet moments when you stop performing and start reflecting, when you stop reacting and start responding, when you stop following and start leading, starting with leading yourself. This is not easy work. If it were easy, everyone would do it. Most people prefer the familiar discomfort of confusion to the unfamiliar discomfort of growth. Most people prefer the immediate gratification of external stimulation to the delayed gratification of internal development. But you're not most people. If you were, you wouldn't be here listening to this, thinking about how to make your life better. You're someone who understands that life is too short and too precious to waste on being less than you could be. You're someone who's willing to do the work that most people won't do so you can have the life that most people won't have. You're someone who understands that the best investment you can make is in yourself, in your own growth, in your own development. And the foundation of that investment is silence. The willingness to spend time alone with yourself, to face whatever you find there, to process it, to learn from it, to use it as fuel for becoming better. So I challenge you to make this commitment. Starting today, create space for silence in your life. Protect that space like you protect anything else that's precious to you. Use that space to connect with yourself, to listen to your own wisdom, to plan your own growth. Don't wait until you have more time, because you'll never have more time. Don't wait until your life is less busy, because life is always busy. Don't wait until it feels comfortable, because growth never feels completely comfortable. Start where you are with what you have right now. 10 minutes a day, just you and your thoughts, just you and your dreams, just you and the person you're capable of becoming. Because that person, the best version of you, is waiting. They're waiting in the silence for you to show up, to pay attention, to do the work of bringing them to life. They have things to accomplish that only they can accomplish. They have contributions to make that only they can make. They have a life to live that only they can live. But they can't emerge without your commitment to the silence where they're being built. They can't develop without your willingness to spend time in the internal workshop where real transformation happens. The world needs the best version of you. Your family needs the best version of you. Your work needs the best version of you. But most importantly, you need the best version of you. You deserve to experience what it feels like to live as the person you're capable of becoming. That experience is waiting for you in the silence, in the quiet moments when nobody else is watching, when there's no immediate reward, when it's just you and the work of becoming who you're meant to be. The best version of you is built in silence. So give yourself the gift of that silence. Protect it, value it, use it, because what you build there will serve you for the rest of your life. And when people ask you how you changed, how you became so clear and focused and strong, you'll know the answer. You'll know that it wasn't magic or luck or some secret technique. It was simply the consistent practice of spending time alone with yourself, of listening to your own wisdom, of building in private what you live in public. The best version of you is built in silence. But let me share something else with you that's equally important. Once you start building that best version of yourself in the quiet moments, you have to learn how to protect it when you step back into the noise of the world. See, the world doesn't stop making demands just because you found some clarity. Your phone doesn't stop ringing just because you've had some insights. People don't stop having expectations of you just because you're working on becoming better. In fact, sometimes it feels like the opposite happens. The more you grow, the more demands there seem to be on your time and attention. This is where many people lose what they've gained in the silence. They do the internal work. They get clear about who they are and what they want. But then they let the external pressures wash it all away. They go back to saying yes to everything, back to letting other people's urgencies become their priorities, back to living reactive lives instead of intentional ones. But here's what I want you to understand. The strength you build in silence isn't meant to stay in silence. It's meant to support you when you're back in the world, dealing with real life, facing real challenges, making real decisions. The clarity you develop in solitude is meant to guide you when you're surrounded by confusion and competing voices. Think of it this way. When you exercise, you're not exercising just so you can be strong in the gym. You're exercising so you can be strong when you need to carry groceries, climb stairs, play with your children, handle whatever physical demands life puts on you. The same thing applies to the mental and emotional strength you build in silence. You're not building it just so you can feel good when you're alone. You're building it so you can handle whatever life throws at you with grace and wisdom. But just like physical strength, this internal strength requires maintenance. You can't work out once and stay strong forever. You can't spend time in silence once and stay clear forever. This has to become a way of life, a consistent practice, something you commit to regardless of how busy you get or how many other people want your attention. I've seen too many people make the mistake of thinking that once they've figured something out, they're done. They have a breakthrough in their thinking, they get clear about their direction, they feel strong and confident, and then they stop doing the things that got them there. They stop making time for silence because they think they don't need it anymore. But that's like thinking you can stop eating because you had a good meal yesterday. Growth is not a destination, it's a process. And like any process, it requires ongoing attention, ongoing investment, ongoing commitment. The most successful people I know, the ones who maintain their clarity and strength year after year, they never stop investing in their internal development. They never stop creating space for silence and reflection. They understand that this isn't something you graduate from. This is something you grow into more and more deeply over. And here's something beautiful that happens as you maintain this practice over the years. The quality of your silence gets better. In the beginning, when you first start spending time alone with your thoughts, it might feel chaotic. Your mind might jump all over the place. You might feel restless or anxious or overwhelmed by everything that comes up. But as you persist, as you keep showing up for those quiet moments with yourself, your mind learns to settle. Your thoughts become less scattered and more focused. Your emotions become less reactive and more stable. Your insights become deeper and more practical. It's like the difference between a muddy pond and a clear lake. When the water is constantly being stirred up, you can't see through it. But when it's allowed to settle, when it's given time to become still, you can see all the way to the bottom. Your mind works the same way. When it's constantly being stirred up by external demands and distractions, you can't see clearly. But when you give it time to settle in silence, clarity emerges naturally. This is why the practice gets easier and more rewarding over time. Not because the challenges of life get easier, but because your capacity to handle them gets stronger. Not because external pressures decrease, but because your internal stability increases. And as your internal stability increases, something interesting happens with your relationships. You stop being so dependent on other people's approval or validation. You stop taking things personally that aren't really about you. You stop getting pulled into drama and conflict. That doesn't serve anyone. Instead, you become what I call a stabilizing force in other people's lives. When everyone around you is stressed and reactive, you remain calm and thoughtful. When everyone else is making decisions based on fear or pressure, you make decisions based on wisdom and values. When everyone else is running around frantically, you move with purpose and intention. This doesn't make you better than other people. It just makes you more useful to them. Because everyone needs someone in their life who isn't swept away by every emotional storm, someone who can think clearly when everyone else is confused, someone who can provide a steady presence when everything else feels chaotic. But you can't be that person for others if you haven't first learned to be that person for yourself. And you can't be that person for yourself without the foundation of silence, without the practice of solitude, without the commitment to ongoing internal development. Now, let me address something that might be bothering some of you. You might be thinking, Jim, this all sounds good, but what about the people who need me? What about my family, my friends, my coworkers? Don't I have responsibilities to them? Isn't it selfish to spend time focusing on myself when other people are counting on me? And my answer is this: the most generous thing you can do for the people who depend on you is to become the best version of yourself. The most loving thing you can do for your family is to show up as a clear, centered, emotionally stable person. The most professional thing you can do for your coworkers is to bring focused attention and sound judgment to your work. You can't give what you don't have. If you're scattered, you'll scatter the people around you. If you're anxious, you'll make the people around you anxious. If you're unclear about your own values and priorities, you'll create confusion in the lives of people who look to you for guidance. But when you take the time to build strength and clarity in silence, when you commit to your own growth and development, you become a source of stability and wisdom for everyone whose life you touch. You become someone people can count on, not because you always have the right answers, but because you have the internal resources to find good answers when they're needed. This is not selfish. This is strategic. This is understanding that your personal development is not separate from your ability to contribute to others. Your personal development is the foundation of your ability to contribute to others. Think about the people who have made the biggest positive difference in your life. I'm willing to bet they weren't people who sacrificed their own growth for your benefit. They were people who took responsibility for their own development and then shared the benefits of that development with you. They were people who did their own internal work and then brought the fruits of that work into their relationships with others. You can be that person for the people in your life, but only if you're willing to do the work that makes it possible. Only if you're willing to invest in the silence where that person is built. And here's something else I want you to consider. When you commit to building the best version of yourself in silence, you're not just improving your own life, you're contributing to the improvement of the world. Because the world is changed, one person at a time. Every time someone becomes clearer, stronger, wiser, more authentic, the collective level of consciousness rises a little bit. Every time someone chooses growth over comfort, truth over convenience, courage over fear, they make it a little easier for the next person to make the same choice. Every time someone demonstrates what's possible when you commit to your own development, they inspire others to believe that such development is possible for them too. This is how real change happens. Not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through individuals quietly, consistently doing the work of becoming better. Through people like you choosing to spend time in silence, to face yourself honestly, to build internal strength that translates into external contribution. So when you make this commitment to silence, to solitude, to personal development, you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for everyone whose life will be touched by the person you become. You're doing it for your children, who will learn more from who you are than from what you say. You're doing it for your coworkers, who will benefit from your clarity and focus. You're doing it for your community, which needs people who think before they act, and who act from wisdom rather than impulse. But even more than that, you're doing it because you have a responsibility to yourself. You have a responsibility to find out what you're really capable of, to develop the talents you've been given, to live up to the potential that exists within you. Too many people go through life never really knowing who they could have been. They get so caught up in meeting other people's expectations, in fitting into other people's definitions of success, in avoiding other people's disapproval, that they never take the time to discover their own authentic path. But when you commit to the practice of silence, when you create regular space for solitude and reflection, you give yourself the opportunity to hear your own voice clearly. You give yourself the chance to discover what you really care about, what you're really good at, what you really want your life to stand for. And once you discover those things, once you get clear about your authentic path, you'll find that you have access to energy and motivation and creativity that you never knew you had. Because when you're living in alignment with who you really are, when you're working toward goals that genuinely matter to you, everything becomes easier. Not because the external challenges disappear, but because the internal resistance disappears. You stop fighting yourself. You stop sabotaging your own efforts. You stop getting in your own way. Instead, all parts of you start working together toward the same objectives. Your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, your decisions, they all start pointing in the same direction. This is what I mean when I say the best version of you is built in silence. It's not just about becoming more disciplined or more productive, though those things often happen. It's about becoming integrated, authentic, aligned with your deepest values and highest aspirations. And here's what I've observed about people who achieve this level of integration. They don't struggle with motivation the way other people do. They don't have to force themselves to work toward their goals. They don't have to rely on willpower to keep going when things get difficult. Instead, they're pulled forward by a clear sense of purpose. They're energized by work that aligns with their values. They're sustained by the knowledge that what they're doing matters, not just to other people, but to their own sense of who they're meant to be. This is the ultimate gift of the silence. Not just clarity about what you want, but alignment between who you are and what you do. Not just knowledge about your goals, but integration between your values and your actions. But I want to be honest with you about something else. This journey of building your best self in silence, it's not always pleasant. There will be times when you sit with yourself and you don't like what you see. There will be moments when you face truths about yourself that are uncomfortable or disappointing. You might realize that you've been lying to yourself about something important. You might discover that you've been living according to other people's values instead of your own. You might recognize patterns of behavior that have been holding you back. You might feel emotions that you've been avoiding for years. This is part of the process. This is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. This is a sign that you're doing something right. because you can't change what you won't acknowledge. You can't fix what you won't see. You can't grow beyond patterns that you refuse to recognize. So when the silence reveals things about yourself that are difficult to face, don't run away. Don't turn on the TV or call a friend or find some other way to distract yourself. Stay with it. Breathe through it. Let yourself feel whatever comes up. Remember that these difficult moments are not permanent. They're just part of the process of becoming more honest with yourself. And on the other side of that honesty is freedom. Freedom from pretending to be someone you're not. Freedom from carrying around secrets that drain your energy. Freedom from fighting battles against parts of yourself that you've been trying to deny or suppress. When you can face yourself completely, when you can accept all parts of yourself without judgment, when you can look at your mistakes and your weaknesses and your fears without shame, then you become truly powerful. Not because you're perfect, but because you're authentic. Not because you don't have problems, but because you're willing to acknowledge and work with your problems. This kind of self-acceptance is not about giving up on growth or making excuses for behaviors that don't serve you. It's about creating a foundation of honesty and compassion that makes real growth possible. Because you can't hate yourself into becoming better. You can't shame yourself into positive change. You can only grow from a place of acceptance and understanding. So as you develop your practice of silence, as you spend more time in honest reflection and solitude, be patient with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Remember that this is a process, not a performance. Remember that the goal is not perfection, but progression. Every moment you spend in authentic self-reflection is valuable, even if it doesn't feel comfortable. Every insight you gain about yourself is useful, even if it's not flattering. Every step you take toward greater self-awareness is worthwhile, even if it feels slow. Because here's what happens as you persist in this practice over time. You start to develop what I call unconditional confidence. Not confidence that depends on external circumstances being perfect, but confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life brings you. You stop being afraid of your own emotions because you've learned to sit with them and understand them. You stop being afraid of other people's opinions because you've developed trust in your own judgment. You stop being afraid of failure because you've learned to see failure as information rather than as a judgment on your worth. This kind of confidence is unshakable because it's not based on external validation or perfect circumstances. It's based on your relationship with yourself, on your ability to stay centered regardless of what's happening around you. And when you operate from this kind of confidence, everything in your life improves. Your relationships become more authentic because you're not trying to be someone you're not. Your work becomes more effective because you're able to focus on what really matters. Your decision-making becomes clearer because you're not paralyzed by fear or confusion. You become, in short, the best version of yourself. Not perfect, but authentic. Not without challenges, but equipped to handle them. Not without fears, but not controlled by them. This is what's waiting for you in this silence. This is what you're building every time you choose solitude over distraction, reflection over reaction, internal development over external validation. The best version of you is built in silence, but it's lived in the world. It's expressed through your actions, your relationships, your contributions, your choices. The silence is where it's built, but life is where it's revealed. So I'll ask you again, are you ready to get quiet enough to build it? Are you ready to commit to the practice that will transform not just how you think about yourself, but how you show up in the world? Are you ready to discover what you're really capable of when you stop running from yourself and start building with yourself? So here we are at the end of our time together. But really, this is just the beginning for you. The best version of you is built in silence, but it's lived in the world. It's expressed through your actions, your relationships, your contributions, your choices. The silence is where it's built, but life is where it's revealed. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, you have a choice. You can reach for your phone like you always do, fill your mind with other people's noise, and continue living the same life you've been living. Or you can give yourself 10 minutes of silence, just 10 minutes to sit with yourself. to listen to your own thoughts, to connect with the person you're capable of becoming. The world needs the best version of you. Your family needs it. Your work needs it. But most importantly, you need it. You deserve to experience what it feels like to live as the person you're truly capable of becoming. Violence is waiting. Your best self is waiting. The question is, are you ready to meet them both? Rhetoric Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.